Good. The first question about the BDS. You know, there's a moment where a certain impulse, such as the BDS, becomes successful. And you have to take into account that when you are successful, the reaction, the backlash would be very strong. That's a very good sign. The fact that Britain is now pressured to pass legislation against BDS, the fact that France has already passed legislation against BDS, the fact that Obama has inserted BDS, anti-BDS legislation into the new trade agreement with Europe, and what you are experiencing here now in the United States, I think is a very good moment. Imagine that they would have thought that BDS is so unimportant that they don't have to legislate against it. You know, activism should really have a clear orientation. You are fighting one of the strongest political military projects of European modernization in the Middle East. It's an uphill fight. They will fight back. Of course they will struggle back. So I think that, first of all, that there are two conclusions to be taken from what in the moment that we are. A, we are doing the right thing. There's no doubt we should continue doing what we can within the limitation that will be imposed on us, for sure. And secondly, we should check very well whether all these actions are really legal. This is the law faculty here, right? I think most of the actions against the BDS are not legal in their own countries. I checked it. They're really not. Beginning with the fact that this is intervention of a foreign country's lobbying on behalf of legislation. But that's just the easy one among them. So yeah, the struggle needs to be expanded to the legal tribunals, to the legal realm. It's definitely going to be harsher and more difficult, but it just means that you have to galvanize even more energy against it, for it, against this anti-BDS, how shall I call it, energy. And you have to look at the anti-apartheid movement. There was a similar moment in the anti-apartheid movement in the 60s and the 70s. South Africa was not as powerful as Israel, but it was powerful enough to define any support for the ANC as support for terrorism. And yet, people overcame that moment. I really think that compared to what people are suffering on the ground in Palestine and in Gaza, what pro-PDS activists are suffering in Europe and America is bearable. And I have no practical advice, but really I think legally it should be consulted, and no need to hit the head at the wall. I mean, it may be other things, but the most important thing is to remember that it's working. It really is working in many ways. It's not the only thing that should work. There's no tangible results on the ground for Palestinians that it is working, but it is going in the right direction. Indonesia and Eritrea. I think that the problem with these two models is that they are still built on kind of a geographical distribution. And I think what is so unique in the case of Palestine is that if you at all inject the idea of demarcating of boundaries within the land of Palestine, you are playing into the hand of the settler-colonialist project, and you are not contributing to reconciliation. It's something which is very difficult to understand sometimes, because that does not mean that we are talking here about an ideal type love story that everybody would love everyone in decolonized Israel and Palestine. In fact, the Middle East would be built all the time on small enclaves of collective identities based on ethnicity, religion, and so on. We know it. This was always the Middle East. This will always be the Middle East. The Ottoman empires, unlike the colonialist powers that replaced them, understood them. They never pitted one group against the other, and they actually allowed them quite good coexistence. of course, provided they would not challenge the rule of the Ottomans. There was a small caveat, but everything else was okay. Britain and France, the first thing they did was pitting one group against the other, because that's divide and rule. Israel is doing the same. Now, of course, the imperial powers of Russia and the United States have a different idea. They don't even pit one group against the other. They just bomb everyone from the air. That's their idea of reconciliation in Syria. So I think the model that can really work is the model where Palestinians are saying to themselves, these are settlers, but they are a third generation. They are organic part of my home country. And the settlers say, we cannot continue to rob, to exploit, to oppress, because even if we don't understand that this is morally wrong, eventually we will be told that this is not working for economic reasons and political reasons and strategic reasons. And it's enough to convince a small part of the population. You don't need to convince everyone. Not every white person in South Africa became anti-apartheid on the day that apartheid fell. Last question.
Reclosure of...
Yeah. I'm 62 and not that bad. Yeah, you're right. First of all, I will tell you what exactly was closed. There are two clusters that have been closed after they were opened. One was about the atrocities committed during the 48 war. The Israeli army committed about 40 massacres, horrendous massacres during the 48 war, because in places where the Palestinians refused to leave. And the files were open when I worked on the massacres and other cases of rape and other atrocities and war crimes. These are closed. The second one was the village files, which is a very important indication that that the Zionist movement already in 1940 prepared the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948. I think the reason for closing those two is very clear. I mean, there's no problem in Israel in 2016 to discuss the events of 1948 as a war of existence, and therefore saying, yes, we might have done terrible things, and we might even have expelled the people, because otherwise they would have expelled us. This is the new kind of Israeli version of events of 1948. However, they say, we cannot allow anyone who is not a good historian, namely a Zionist historian, to see the documents, because they will use it against us. We were naive when we thought that people like Ilan would go to the archives and would remember to be patriots as well as professional historians. And patriotism today in Israeli academia is far more important than professional excellence. And I think that's the reason. I think there's a larger context here. Israel is, the Israeli society is tired in playing the democratic game. There's a fatigue. There's a sense that, why should we play with democracy? I mean, there's no need for it anymore. Saudi Arabia is our best ally in the you need to be democratic to be an ally of the Saudi Arabians. No, not really. I don't want to offend anyone from Saudi Arabia, but you're not really a democracy. I hope you understand that. We can outlaw our human rights organization, and there's a silence in the world. Yeah. You know, we don't allow people to enter Israel, and there's a silence in the world. So let's take it a bit further and see what happens, and see where democracy serves us and where democracy is actually a liability. Opening secrets from the past is a liability. So there's no need for it. This is a new version of Israeli democracy. It's a democracy if it serves the national interest. If it can harm the national interest, then there's no need for it, because actually there's no reaction to it. There's no kind of price to be paid for it. Okay. Yes, I think New York is very strong in post-colonialism. And for a while, I was also kind of attracted to this. And it makes sense because it's very difficult to really grasp that you are within both the colonialist and settler-colonialist situation in the 21st century. in most of your courses, in your books, when you write about colonialism, you write about history. You don't include it in current affairs. But in Israel, it's current affairs. And I think that's one of the reasons that post-colonialism looked as kind of a relevant paradigm because there was an uneasiness with application of a 19th century concept to the reality of the 21st century. I think it's also the result of the fake peace process. You thought that you were in the midst of a process of reconciliation. You can already talk about the day after, including in a very negative way about the day after, and so on. But I think we have to go back to anti-colonialism, not post-colonialism. There's no luxury yet to discuss post-colonialism in Palestine. We have to adapt the anti-colonialist literature, thinking, strategy to the 21st century. Che Guevara is not relevant, unfortunately. I wish he were. And we have to find our own intellectual sources, our own ideological motivations, and our own conceptualization. We'll have to start from the beginning. They won't help us. I mean, people who would come and say, there's kind of a huge ideology you can use that will help you. Doesn't work. A similar thing is about nationalism. Palestinians find it difficult, and one can fully understand it, to accept that they are experiencing a post-national moment. They don't have to believe in post-nationalism, but they are in a post-national movement because the national liberation movement has not succeeded. So they are in a post-national moment, but that doesn't mean that liberation is not an option. It just means that it has to be defined differently, it has to be exercised differently, and both sides have to work on this. The total BDS question. Yes, I think first of all, there were teasing problems to the movement. Every movement has teasing problem. And certain mistakes that were made at the beginning. But all in all, I think, the BDS is going in the right direction, distinguishing between institutional boycott and individual boycott, respecting the feeling in the West Bank, the strong feeling in the West Bank against normalization, which may even prevent me from speaking in BZ. So not everything is ideal, but again, it's a matter of perspective. You have to remember those you are working for, what they are suffering. As I said to my Israeli colleague who thinks maybe he's right that his article was not accepted in a journal because of the atmosphere of the BDS, although the BDS does not say to journals not to accept articles from Israeli academics. It's not part of the BDS guideline. But there are Israelis who think that maybe some of their articles have not been accepted. I said, yes, let's call Amnesty and the Red Cross, and maybe not talk about the refugee problem in Europe, because God forbid, your Article 35 has not been accepted in the Journal for Post-Colonial Studies. Again, I mean, I understand it, and I'm not joking. It can affect promotion, it can affect living. This is university. I take academics seriously as much as I can. But still, it depends of, do you think that you are part of a society that commits on a daily basis crimes against humanity or not? That's the question. Not the question of is the BDS totally effective, all the time right, and so on. So I think that's the question. By the way, I think it's an organization that is very democratic and all the time listens to criticism and are trying to find a way. It's not easy. Especially academic boycott is a very complex concept. I agree. It's not an easy idea. It doesn't work too well always. And that brings me to the third question. Yes, there are no tangible facts on the ground to show that this has changed anything in the balance of power. But that's not the right way to look at the BDS. You know, when people started boycotting South Africa, they had an address. They had an ANC. There was a national leadership. They told them exactly what it needs from its supporters outside. Do you know anyone in New York you can call from Palestine to ask them what they want from you? I don't know such a phone number. There isn't such a phone number. You have to decide yourself what is the best you can do for the oppressed Palestinians, because there is no Palestinian national movement working right now. So the BDS is quite impressive in that it found the way to be effective despite the fact that everybody told it the issue of representation on the Palestinian side has not been resolved. There's no unity yet. Nobody knows what exactly the Palestinians want. Despite all that, people said, we're not waiting. People were not waiting. They were listening to the Palestinian civil society, not to the Palestinian national leadership. It was not the PA that called for the BDS. It was the civil society that called for the BDS. And I think that's very important. And I don't think that balance of power is only military balance of power. The fact that there are sections of the Palestinian civil society that know that they have the support from the outside changes the balance of power. I think the fact that Israelis know that they are much more a pariah state than they were before is a change of the balance of power. Of course, it's not enough. The Palestinians would have to get their act together, of course. And we need many other things to happen for the reality on the ground to change. And we have to work quickly, because, as I said, the logic of elimination can also end very badly in the case of Palestine, as it did in other cases. But we also have to remember something else. This is not just about Palestine. This is about social justice. And the struggle for social justice always faces powerful structures. Multinational corporation, banks, powerful people. And it's not a coincidence that people don the Palestinian flag, cover themselves with the Palestinian flag when they struggle for industrial rights, either here or elsewhere, because it symbolizes that kind of injustice. So yes, the struggle for justice, for morality, for Palestine is a struggle that cynically is brushed aside by people who produce weapons, who run as politicians in the United States or Europe, who are managing banks and running the economy. I mean, I'm not underestimating these people. They're quite powerful. But this is our life. This is our planet. So what? Are we going to sit and say, this is it? We are all struggling against it in one way or another without tangible results all the time of balance of power. I haven't seen the neoliberal capitalist system in Spain disappearing, with all due respect. And we saw what happened to Syriza in Greece, which is not very nice news. You go back to Dan Sirtaki rather than talk about Greek politics at this moment in time. So I think that this is not helpful in a way to say, which is true, I'm not denying it, which is true. I think what it means is that you do what you do where you are, and maybe you do even more. But you don't have to depress yourself by saying, people in Palestine tell me that there's no tangible results. Because it would be much worse if you didn't do anything and there were no tangible results. So I think that this is a historic, maybe because I'm an historian, I'm more patient. I'm more patient, and I think that it's working. And I really don't think this evil project of Zionism would always be there. I believe history taught me that if political project is based on immorality, it comes to an end. Because I'm part of this project, I really want it to come to a peaceful end and not a disastrous end. But this is all I can say about that. Yeah. I think we have to be careful when we look at the present crisis in the Middle East and understand, like any human disaster area, there's always more than one reason for that disaster. What I was trying to highlight in my talk is, of course, the effect of Zionism on that disaster. Right? So I think the disaster that we are seeing in Syria, in Iraq, and elsewhere has also other reasons. But I agree with you that in order to solve the major problems that are at the heart of the barbarism and inhumanity we see today in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere, we need to include Israel and Palestine in the discussion of the future. And that discussion has to be based on human rights and civil rights, not just on national rights and collective rights, which is what we used to do until now. And people did not listen to conversations about human rights and civil rights in the Middle East because Israel was exempted from these conversations. And we know that this is a very powerful incentive for the support that extreme groups in the Middle East are getting. It's exactly that Israeli exceptionalism that is part of this. So with this, I totally agree with you. And I think that the project of the nation state, the Arab nation state, will have to be re-examined. It doesn't mean that every Arab nation state would come out of this examination not being an Arab nation state. But it's quite possible that there will be some significant, it's not possible, it's sure, I'm confident, that certain Arab countries, such as Iraq, Syria, and I think also Israel and Palestine, would be reformulated. I don't know how, I don't need to know how, I don't need to do everything. I don't know exactly how. But I think they will be reformulated. They will be reformulated. And the principles that guided the Ottoman Empire, not the colonialist powers, would come back to life. The principles that have respect to collective identity, but not every collective identity needs to be sovereign. There's no need for sovereignty. But on the other hand, there is no need to build nation states that prefer one collective identity above others. So there's a lot of work to be done in the Middle East. And like in the case of Israel and Palestine, the discourse is a waste of time of the powers that be. For cynical reasons, of course. Not because people are wrong, because it serves a lot of people to continue and create this mess and maintain it. It could have been avoided, at least in 2003, to begin with, but nobody wanted to avoid it. So I think you're right, that there has to be a linkage there, and a strong linkage. For the question from the West Bank, listen, I'm not in the habit of giving advice to people what to do. But because we live in the same country, and I'm a settler and you're a native, we should think together about it. We should think about not only your problem, but also the people in Gaza who have even worse problems than you do. The people in the Nakab who have worse problems than you do. The people in Hilwe and the people from Yarmouk who have worse problems than all of us have. And we should wipe out the logic of Oslo and say to ourselves, this was not working, the idea that Palestine is only the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This is not working, that Palestinians are only people who live in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. No, we want to include everyone in the conversation, a tough conversation. Refugees, people in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, settlers, Jews, namely, in Israel, Palestinians in Israel. We should include everyone in a very long dialogue. It will take ages, but that's the dialogue you need to have, not the dialogue. The false dialogue that continued since 1967 produced 5 Nobel Peace Prizes, 500 books, and 65 academic positions. I made up the last number, I have no idea. I noticed in academia, if you give a precise number, people are impressed. So that's what you need. But I think one has to be fair to people like you. I mean, people who live under, particularly the part of the military occupation of the settler-colonialists. Although I don't think you are under occupation. I think it's ridiculous to talk about occupation. You're under colonization. You are part of a settler-colonialist project. Is that people who are exactly under the boot will always find it difficult to strategize because they have to survive. In no case in history was strategy of a liberation movement created in the country that was occupied and oppressed. They always came from the outside. So you have to listen and talk with the people from the outside because they have the luxury of strategizing. Don't expect anyone in the West Bank to come with a great idea of how to get rid of the Israelis. The only thing people in the West Bank can do is from silent demonstration to a very active and even violent demonstration because life is unbearable. And we see it today in the so-called knives intifada. So I think that if you are here, you have a better chance actually to be part of a larger discussion than if you are in Ramallah and Nablus or Halil. Land reform. Recently, a lot of my liberal Zionist friends, and I have some still, began talking about one-state solution. I said, wow, what's going on here? I was Satan when I mentioned it for the first time in Israel. Suddenly say, no, you know, two-state solutions are working. So I said, how did they do this transformation? Suddenly, what happened to Zionism? And then I realized they think about a one-state solution that doesn't require any concession on their side. Namely, tomorrow we decide that everybody can vote. My friend Jiris can vote to the Israeli parliament. I can vote to the Israeli parliament. And Bob's your uncle. Everybody's happy. What's the problem? And let's have a one-state solution. So I talked to such a group in Tel Aviv, and I said to them, but you know, you won't be able to build a joint political structure on the basis of the present discriminations, on the basis of the present power relations. That will not hold water. That means you'll just have a more, maybe a better apartheid state to commodified outside, but it will not be changing anything. So I said, what do you mean? I said, well, you will have to talk about the redistribution of resources. You robbed the Palestinian land from 1882 until today. Is there a way of redistributing the land? You expelled people who might want to come back. How do you integrate them after they're coming back? These are harsh questions. You have all the positions of power, economic, cultural, political, military. What does it mean not having all these political powers? How do we protect you when this power is taken from you? You know, these are harsh questions and difficult questions. All I'm saying is that we had 50 years to discuss it. We didn't do it. I hope in the next 50 years we're going to do it, because if we are not, it will be very disastrous. So I don't know exactly about the land reform, which is the best in this case. As I don't know how many Palestinian refugees would like to return. I have no idea. Nobody knows. And so I don't know what it would mean to the country. But at least I want to have the right conversation. I want to look for the key. Where I lost it, I had enough of standing under the light doing nothing. Okay? Thank you. As I said before, I think the BDS movement was born exactly because there was no clear orientation coming from the Palestinian national movement itself. So solidarity movements were trying to make decisions on something that were not asked to make decisions. It didn't really matter what was the preferred solution in the eyes of the solidarity movement. That was up to the national movement itself to decide what is the kind of solution they want. Solidarity is not interfering with what the people you want to help are asking you to help them with, but rather helping them achieve what they want. So I think some of these debates were a bit irrelevant to us who were living there. But I think, as I said, that the BDS in this respect, that was the point I was trying to make, that the BDS was a very clever, genuine, I think very conscious moral solution to that problem of lack of orientation, lack of direction on the one hand, and yet a willingness to do something. You don't want to just not do anything. And if you remember, the BDS is based on supporting 3 basic rights for the Palestinians, those inside Israel, those in the West Bank and Gaza, and the refugees. And the discourse of human rights and civil rights was not the discourse of the Palestinian national movement. The discourse of the Palestinian national movement was the discourse of national rights. But I think it sort of was a precursor of what came afterwards. That in the 21st century, the nationalist language, either in Syria or in Iraq or in Palestine, and I'm afraid to say the next is Jordan and Lebanon, is not a relevant conversation anymore. It's the conversation of the past, not the conversation of the future. And the conversation of the future can be stretched between Islamic states to states that respect human rights and civil rights, and in between we will have chaotic, anarchic, very unpleasant phases that we will have to bear and somehow get through. And therefore, I think the solidarity movement actually, by focusing on the rights, on human rights, not accepting exceptionalism, that's the main message of the BDS. I mean, the BDS doesn't say the violation of human rights in Palestine is worse than the violation of human rights elsewhere. It says the violation of human rights in Palestine is not acknowledged, is not reacted. That's the main point. The point of McCarthy, I agree, but I think there were differences, and that's why I would not expect in the same way that the McCarthy wave ended here, that Israel would change from, from above, so to speak, from the governing classes or the elites. No, I don't think it will happen there. I'll tell you with all honesty what I think is going to happen, but it's only one possible scenario. Most of the well-off Israelis come from European background. And unlike in the case of the McCarthy, maybe, or maybe like some cases in the period of the McCarthy, but it was too short to compare it, would eventually say to themselves, both options are not nice to us. Not the present Israel and not the kind of liberated Palestine. And they're already showing this. They are here, they are in Berlin, the numbers are growing in a very, I'm talking not about the people who came here to continue the struggle for Palestine. There are those as well. I'm talking about those who came to Berlin and the United States to live in a different environment, which is okay. It's one form of decolonization. I have nothing against it. They can go. The problem is, of course, those Israeli Jews who cannot afford going because they don't have European passports and they don't have the means to do it. And most of them are Ethiopian Jews, Moroccan Jews, Iraqi Jews, Georgian Jews, and they, in fact, will have to undergo a transformation in their perception of what they are doing in the new homeland as settlers. And in this respect, the Palestinian national movement would have to, although the left in the Palestinian national movement said it before, but there's no left also in Palestine, not only in Israel. But they will need to recreate a left. Because the left is the only ideology, socialism, communism, doesn't matter. It's the only ideology that can offer these people a horizon which is better than the present reality in Israel, not Zionism. So we have a lot of work to do in this respect, but it will not be like the McCarthy. It would be a process of emigration, social justice, and rebuilding, and I fully agree with you, rebuilding the whole structure that the colonialist powers have built during Sykes-Picot. I fully agree with you. Without that, it will not succeed. Without that, it will not. I fully agree. Finally, You know, it's first of all, it's a matter of experience. I mean, it's probably not very easy to bear it in the beginning when you're being called either a self-hating Jew, and I suppose anti-Semite. But I really think that we are overdoing both the allegation and its power, and we should be careful not to be drawn into it. We know that human beings are not born anti-Semites. We know that the most anti-Semitic group in the United States, the Christian Zionists, is the greatest supporter of Israel. We know that a very important part of the pro-solidarity group with the Palestinians are Jews. So when we have these facts, we should really be able to defeat these allegations and not to be intimidated by them. I know, even in England, these I could see my own university being paralyzed for a week when they were told that the conference on Palestine and settler-colonialism is anti-Semitic. They were afraid. I mean, you know, they looked for stupid ways, actually, to get out of it at the beginning, because it's frightening in Europe and so on. But I really find it more and more pathetic as the time goes by. I could see its effectiveness in the beginning, but I think Israel is overdoing it so much. I mean, every demonstration against Israel reminds them of Auschwitz. That I think they are losing it. And we talked about and with this I will end, we talked about the backlash of the BDS. They are not using just accusation of anti-Semitism. The only way they can convince people to pass legislations against BDS in Spain or here, the only way they can do it, either by bribery or intimidation. I don't believe they have convinced anyone that they have a solid argument against it. And we know that. So this is the kind of thing that has to be exposed. This is the kind of thing that brings anti-Semitism back, by the way. Yeah. Right. Israel is acting according to the anti-Semitic stereotype of Jews. So I think we should answer them back that this is anti-Semitism in reverse, what they're doing, and not being intimidated by it. And I think really if you're a young person, you know, the more you are at least at peace with yourself, with what you believe in and what you are standing for, I really think these accusation and allegation and shaming eventually just pass on you and don't touch you because they're not genuine and they come from the place where there is no counter-moral argument. I will end by telling you, I wrote it in my book, The Idea of Israel. In 2010, Benjamin Netanyahu organized a group called BIG, Brand Israel Group. He recruited everyone he could to resell Israel. He felt that he cannot brand Israel in a good way. And it was very interesting to read his instructions to the people. The first instruction was, don't get into moral arguments about the occupation, because you're going to lose. I mean, even he knows it. He knows Israel has no moral argument. So I think we are fighting against something that is based on power and power alone, which doesn't mean that it's an easy fight, as we heard, but it means at least that accusation of immorality, of inhumanity, really are so far-fetched when it comes to the people who support Palestine that we should really take the conversation elsewhere. Thank you.